The clock on the wall showed exactly 6 a.m. when David pushed his cleaning cart through the massive glass doors of Sterling Tower. The sound of the wheels rolling across the marble floor echoed through the empty lobby like whispers in a church. This was his favorite time of day. The building belonged to him and the other night shift workers for just a few more hours before the business world came rushing in. David had been doing this job for 8 months now, and he knew every corner of this 40-story building. He knew which elevators made that slight grinding sound on the 20th floor, which bathroom on the 15th floor had a leaky faucet, and exactly how long it took to clean each section of the building. But most importantly, he knew the patterns of the people who worked here. The morning routine never changed. First, he would clean the lobby, making sure every surface sparkled under the expensive lights hanging from the ceiling. Then he would work his way up, floor by floor, timing everything perfectly so he would never run into the early arriving executives. He had learned this the hard way during his first week, when a stern-looking woman in an expensive suit had given him a look that could freeze water. Today felt different, though. As David sprayed the cleaning solution on the reception desk, something in the air seemed charged like the moment before a thunderstorm. He had learned to trust these feelings over the years. They usually meant trouble was coming. The reception desk was massive, made of some kind of black stone that probably cost more than most people made in a year. David took his time with it, making sure every fingerprint and smudge disappeared under his cloth. The morning security guard, an older man named Pete, watched him work from behind the security desk. "You're here early today," Pete said, taking a sip from his coffee cup. David glanced at the clock. 6:05 a.m. Same time as always. "Feels different today," Pete muttered, and David felt that strange feeling in his stomach get stronger. That's when they heard it. The sharp ding of the elevator that only went to the top floors. The executive elevator. David looked up from his work, confused. None of the big shots usually came in this early. The doors slid open with a soft whisper, and out stepped a woman who looked like she owned the world. Catherine Sterling. Even David, who tried to stay invisible in this building, knew who she was. The CEO, the woman whose name was on the building. She was maybe in her early 40s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a navy blue suit that probably cost more than David made in 3 months. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. She stopped walking the moment she saw David. For a few seconds, nobody moved. David continued holding his cleaning cloth. Catherine stared at him like he was something that didn't belong, and Pete shifted uncomfortably behind his desk. The only sound was the quiet hum of the building's air conditioning system. "Excuse me?" Catherine's voice cut through the silence like a knife through butter. It wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of authority that made people stop what they were doing and listen. "What are you doing here?" David looked up at her, keeping his expression calm. He had dealt with difficult people before. "Good morning, ma'am." "I'm just cleaning the—" "I can see what you're doing," Catherine interrupted, taking a step closer. "What I want to know is why you're doing it here at this time in this area." David set down his spray bottle slowly. He could feel Pete watching them, probably wishing he was anywhere else. "I'm scheduled to clean this area at 6 a.m., ma'am. Same as I do every day." Catherine's eyes narrowed. "Scheduled by whom?" "Building maintenance, ma'am." "Well, I don't care what building maintenance told you," Catherine said, her voice getting sharper. "This is a restricted area during executive hours. This lobby is where I meet with clients who have millions of dollars to invest. This is where deals that could change entire industries are discussed. This is not—" She paused, looking David up and down like she was trying to find the right words to describe how little he belonged in her world. "This is not where the cleaning staff should be wandering around when important business is being conducted." David felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he kept his voice steady. "I understand, ma'am, but my shift ends at 7 a.m. and I need to finish this area before the day staff arrives." "Your shift ends when I say it ends," Catherine snapped. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "Yes, ma'am. You're Catherine Sterling." "That's right. I'm Catherine Sterling. I built this company from nothing. I've worked 18-hour days for the past 15 years to make this place what it is today. And I will not have my professional environment compromised by—" She waved her hand at David dismissively. "By people who don't understand what this place represents." Pete cleared his throat nervously from behind his desk. "Ma'am, maybe we could—" "Pete, call security." Catherine ordered without taking her eyes off David. "I want this man removed from the executive areas immediately." David stood up straighter. He wasn't a big man, maybe average height, with hands that showed the wear of years of hard work. His uniform was clean and pressed, his hair was neat, and he carried himself with a quiet dignity that most people never bothered to notice. But something in his eyes changed when Catherine called for security. "Ma'am," David said quietly, "I'm not trying to cause any problems. I'm just trying to do my job." "Your job," Catherine repeated, her voice dripping with condescension. "Let me explain something to you about jobs. Real jobs, important jobs. The people who work in this building handle millions of dollars every day. They make decisions that affect thousands of people's lives. They work with clients who could buy and sell companies before lunch. That's what real work looks like." She gestured around the lobby with its expensive artwork and designer furniture. "This isn't just a building. It's a symbol. It represents success, achievement, the kind of excellence that comes from education, dedication, and natural ability. It represents people who belong at the top of their fields." David listened to every word, his expression never changing. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice so calm it was almost unsettling. "You think I don't belong here? I think you belong exactly where your skills and education have placed you," Catherine replied coldly. "Nothing wrong with honest work, but there's a place for everything, and this isn't your place." David nodded slowly, as if he was considering her words. The elevator dinged again and 2 security guards stepped out. They looked uncomfortable, glancing between Catherine and David like they weren't sure what they were supposed to do. "Ma'am," one of them said hesitantly. Catherine pointed at David. "I want this man escorted out of the executive areas immediately. Make sure he understands that the cleaning staff is not permitted in this lobby during executive hours." The security guards took a step toward David, but he held up his hand. "Wait," David said, his voice still calm but carrying something new now, something that made everyone in the lobby pause. "Before you do that, I think you should know something." Catherine rolled her eyes. "I don't need to know anything except that you're leaving." "I'm here for my daughter," David said simply. The words hung in the air like smoke. Catherine's mouth, which had been opened to say something else cutting, slowly closed. Pete leaned forward at his security desk. The 2 security guards looked at each other confused. "What?" Catherine said finally. "I said I'm here for my daughter," David repeated, meeting her eyes steadily. Catherine stared at him for a long moment, her perfect composure cracking just slightly. "What does that have to do with anything?" "What daughter? Why should I care about your family situation?" David reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small worn photograph. He looked at it for a moment, then held it up so Catherine could see it. 8 months ago," David said quietly, "you hired a young woman fresh out of Harvard Business School, top of her class. Brilliant mind for numbers and strategy. Works harder than anyone else in the building, sometimes staying until midnight to perfect her analysis reports." Catherine's face went pale. She knew exactly who he was talking about. "Lisa Williams," David continued. "She's working on the 32nd floor right now, probably reviewing the Henderson account projections for the morning meeting. She gets here at 5:30 a.m. and rarely leaves before 8 p.m. She drinks her coffee black, keeps a picture of her mother on her desk, and has never once complained about the workload, even when the other junior analysts were grumbling about the hours." Catherine's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I take the night shift," David said, his voice growing warmer as he talked about his daughter, "so I can see her office light on up there. Sometimes when she takes a break and looks out the window, she waves at me. She doesn't know I arrange my schedule to be in the lobby when she arrives each morning, just to make sure she's safe. She doesn't know I've been watching over her, making sure the building is secure when she works those long hours." He put the photograph back in his pocket carefully, like it was made of glass. "She thinks I'm just a janitor who got lucky with some good advice about her career choices, and I want to keep it that way at least for now. But when you tell me I don't belong here, when you say I need to understand my place." David's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it now. "I need you to understand that this building, this company—" Catherine felt like the world had shifted under her feet. She stared at David, this quiet janitor who had just turned her entire morning upside down with a few simple words. Lisa Williams was his daughter. The same Lisa Williams who had impressed everyone in the company with her sharp mind and incredible work ethic. the same young woman Catherine had been considering for a major promotion. "Security," Catherine said weakly, then seemed to remember they were still standing there waiting for orders. "Never mind. You can go." The two guards looked confused but relieved. They nodded quickly and headed back to the elevator, probably grateful to escape whatever was happening in the lobby. Pete pretended to be very interested in his computer screen, though Catherine noticed he was clearly listening to every word. Catherine walked over to one of the leather chairs near the windows and sat down heavily. Her usual perfect posture was gone. She looked like someone had just told her that everything she thought she knew about the world was wrong. "Lisa Williams," she repeated, more to herself than to David. "Your daughter." David nodded, staying where he was by his cleaning cart. He didn't move closer, didn't try to take advantage of her obvious shock. He just stood there with that same calm dignity he'd shown throughout their entire confrontation. She never mentioned... Catherine started, then stopped. I mean, in her interview on her application, there was nothing about having a janitor for a father? David asked quietly. Catherine's cheeks flushed red. Put that way, it sounded terrible. But it was exactly what she had been thinking. "That's not what I meant, isn't it?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the city beginning to wake up. Cars were starting to fill the streets. People were walking to work with their coffee cups and briefcases, normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that inside this building, everything Catherine thought she understood about success and worth was crumbling. "Tell me about her," Catherine said finally. David's entire expression softened when she asked about Lisa. It was like watching ice melt in the sun. "What do you want to know?" And they hear Lisa's story. He leaned against his cleaning cart, getting comfortable like he was settling in for a long conversation. Catherine found herself leaning forward, genuinely curious despite everything that had just happened. "Lisa's mother died when Lisa was 16, David began. "Cancer. It was a long fight, almost 2 years of treatments and hospital visits and hoping for miracles that never came. During that time, I was working 3 different jobs trying to pay for her medical bills and still keep food on the table." Catherine felt something twist in her stomach. She had never had to worry about money, not really. Her father had built Sterling Financial from nothing, but by the time she was old enough to understand what money meant, they had plenty of it. "Lisa was always smart," David continued. "Even as a little kid, she would sit at the kitchen table doing homework while I was getting ready for my night shift, and she would ask me questions that I couldn't answer. Not because they were too hard for a 16-year-old, but because they were too hard for someone who never got past high school." "You never went to college?" Catherine asked. "Dropped out of high school when I was 17 to work full-time. My own father had gotten sick and someone needed to pay the bills." David's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was talking about the weather. "Never really thought about going back to school until Lisa started asking those questions I couldn't answer." Catherine tried to imagine it. A teenage girl losing her mother, a father working 3 jobs, medical bills piling up. It was so far from her own experience that it might as well have been happening on another planet. "After her mother died," David continued, "Lisa threw herself into her schoolwork. I think it was her way of dealing with the grief. She would study until 2 in the morning, then get up at 6 to go to school. Her grades were perfect, but I knew that wouldn't be enough to get her into a good college. We didn't have money for application fees, let alone tuition. But she got into Harvard," Catherine said. "Full scholarship," David said, and the pride in his voice was unmistakable. "Academic achievement, plus financial need, plus an essay about overcoming adversity that made the admissions committee cry. At least that's what they told her when they called to offer her the spot." Catherine found herself smiling despite everything. "She must have been thrilled." "She was terrified," David said with a laugh. "Called me at work crying because she didn't think she belonged there. Said all the other students would be smarter than her, richer than her, better prepared. I told her the same thing I'm going to tell you right now." Catherine raised her eyebrows. "Which is? Belonging isn't about where you come from. It's about what you do once you get there." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. She thought about her own college experience, how she'd always known she would take over her father's company someday, how that knowledge had given her confidence even when she was struggling with difficult classes or demanding professors. Lisa had none of that certainty, none of that safety net. And yet she had not only survived Harvard but graduated at the top of her class. She worked while she was in school? Catherine asked. Work-study program in the library, plus tutoring other students, plus a summer internship at a small accounting firm in Boston. She sent me money when she could, even though I told her not to. Said she wanted to help pay back all the sacrifices I'd made for her education. Catherine felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time she had cried, especially not at work. What sacrifices? David was quiet for a moment, like he was deciding how much to tell her. I went back to school too, he said finally. Got my GED while Lisa was at Harvard. Figured if my daughter was going to be college educated, her old man should at least have a high school diploma. Just your GED? Catherine asked. David smiled mysteriously. Just my GED. But something in his tone made Catherine think there was more to the story. Before she could ask, the elevator dinged again. This time it was the regular elevator, the one that most employees used. Catherine glanced at the clock on the wall. 6:45 a.m. The building was starting to fill up with the early arrivals. A young woman stepped out of the elevator, and Catherine's breath caught in her throat. It was Lisa Williams carrying a leather briefcase and a travel mug of coffee, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She was wearing a gray suit that was professional but clearly not expensive, and she moved with the confident stride of someone who belonged exactly where she was. Lisa saw Catherine sitting in the lobby, and her steps faltered slightly. It wasn't unusual to see the CEO in the building, but it was very unusual to see her sitting in the lobby at 6:45 in the morning, looking like she'd seen a ghost. Good morning. Ms. Sterling, Lisa said politely, then noticed David standing nearby. Her entire face lit up. Dad, you're still here. I thought your shift ended at... Lisa stopped mid-sentence, suddenly realizing that her father and her boss were both in the lobby, and something significant had clearly just happened. Catherine watched the interaction with fascination. The way Lisa's voice changed when she saw David becoming warmer and more relaxed. The way David's entire posture shifted, like he was drawing energy from his daughter's presence. The obvious love between them that no amount of professional distance could hide. Is everything okay? Lisa asked, looking between Catherine and David with growing concern. Catherine stood up slowly, smoothing down her skirt and trying to regain some of her usual composure. Lisa, your father and I were just... She realized she had no idea how to explain what had just happened. How do you tell your star employee that you just spent 20 minutes insulting her father and questioning whether he belonged in the same building where she worked? We were just talking, David said simply, giving Catherine an out she probably didn't deserve. Lisa looked skeptical. She was too smart not to sense the tension in the room, and she knew her father well enough to read the subtle signs of stress in his expression. Talking about what? Lisa asked. Catherine opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. How could she explain that she had just discovered that one of her most promising employees was the daughter of a man she had treated like he was invisible for 8 months? How could she admit that she had made assumptions about worth and belonging that had just been shattered by a quiet conversation in an empty lobby? David looked at his daughter with an expression full of love and something else Catherine was beginning to recognize as protective pride. We were talking about you, he said. Lisa's eyebrows shot up. About me? Why? Because... Catherine said, finally finding her voice. I think I've been very wrong about some things, and your father just helped me understand exactly how wrong I've been. Lisa looked more confused than ever, but before she could ask any more questions, the lobby began filling up with other early arrivals. The moment of strange intimacy was broken as the business day officially began. But as Catherine watched Lisa hug her father goodbye before heading to the elevators, she knew that everything had changed. She had questions that needed answers, and she had a feeling that David Williams was full of surprises she was only just beginning to discover. For the next 3 days, Catherine couldn't focus on anything. She sat through board meetings without really hearing what was being discussed. She reviewed reports without absorbing the information. She found herself staring out her office window, thinking about David Williams and the conversation that had turned her world upside down. Every time she saw Lisa in the hallway or during meetings, Catherine noticed things she had never paid attention to before. The way Lisa always arrived early and stayed late. How she double-checked her work obsessively, like making a mistake would be the end of the world. The quiet confidence she carried, like she knew she had to work twice as hard as everyone else, just to prove she belonged. On Thursday evening, Catherine was working late when she noticed that the lights were still on in Lisa's office on the 32nd floor. It was almost 9 p.m., and most of the building had emptied out hours ago. Catherine found herself walking down to the 32nd floor, something she rarely did. She usually stayed in her penthouse office on the 40th floor, far above the day-to-day operations of the company. Lisa's office door was open, and Catherine could see her hunched over her computer, typing furiously. Her jacket was hung over the back of her chair, and she had rolled up her sleeves. Empty coffee cups sat on her desk along with stacks of papers covered in neat handwriting. Catherine knocked gently on the doorframe. "Lisa?" Lisa looked up, startled. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were still here. I was just finishing up the Henderson projections for tomorrow's presentation." "It's after 9, Catherine said, stepping into the office. "Don't you think that can wait until morning?" Lisa shook her head. "I want to make sure everything is perfect. The Henderson account is huge for us, and I don't want to miss anything important." Catherine looked around the office. It was small, nothing fancy, but Lisa had made it her own. There was a small plant on the windowsill, a few books on business strategy, and yes, there it was, a framed photo on her desk. Catherine stepped closer to get a better look. The photo showed a younger Lisa, maybe in high school, standing next to a woman who was clearly her mother. They were both smiling, and the woman had her arm around Lisa's shoulders. Even in the photo, Catherine could see the intelligence in Lisa's eyes, but also something else, a determination that seemed almost fierce. "Your mother?" Catherine asked gently. Lisa glanced at the photo and smiled softly. "Yes, that was taken about 6 months before she got sick. We were at my school's Honor Society induction ceremony. She looks proud of you." "She was always proud of me," Lisa said, her voice getting quieter. "Sometimes I think too proud. She used to tell people I was going to change the world someday." Catherine sat down in the chair across from Lisa's desk. This was strange territory for her. She wasn't used to personal conversations with employees, especially not conversations about family and feelings. But something about Lisa made her want to understand. "What would she think of you now?" Catherine asked. Lisa considered the question seriously. "I think she'd be happy. I think she'd be proud that I made it this far. But I also think she'd tell me to remember where I came from, and not to forget the people who helped me get here. People like your father." Lisa's face brightened immediately. "Especially my father. He's the strongest person I know. After Mom died, he could have given up. He could have told me we couldn't afford college, that I needed to get a job and help pay the bills. Instead, he worked harder than ever to make sure I could follow my dreams." Catherine felt that familiar twist in her stomach. "What kind of work did he do?" "Everything," Lisa said with a laugh. "Construction during the day, cleaning office buildings at night, weekend jobs at a warehouse. For 2 years I barely saw him awake. He would come home from his day job just long enough to make sure I had dinner and help with homework, then head out for his night shift. That must have been hard on both of you." "It was the hardest thing we ever went through," Lisa admitted. "There were nights when I would hear him come home at 3 a.m. exhausted, and I would feel so guilty. I kept thinking that if I wasn't trying to go to college, he wouldn't have to work so hard." Catherine leaned forward. "Did you ever think about giving up? About not going to college?" "Every day," Lisa said honestly. "But Dad wouldn't let me. He used to say that Mom died believing I was going to do something important with my life, and he wasn't going to let her down. Even when we were eating ramen noodles for dinner for the 3rd night in a row, even when the electricity got shut off because we couldn't pay the bill, he never once suggested I should change my plans." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. She thought about her own college experience, how her biggest worry had been whether to join the debate team or focus on student government. The idea of eating ramen noodles because it was all you could afford was completely foreign to her. "He's still working nights?" Catherine asked, though she already knew the answer. "Yes, but he doesn't have to anymore," Lisa said. "I make enough now to help with his bills, and I keep telling him he should retire, or at least find a day job that's easier on his body. But he says he likes the night shift. Says it gives him time to think." Catherine almost smiled. David had certainly done some thinking during those night shifts. She was beginning to suspect there was a lot more to those quiet hours than Lisa realized. "Lisa?" Catherine said carefully. How much do you know about your father's education? Lisa looked surprised by the question. His education? He dropped out of high school when he was 17. His father got sick and someone needed to work full-time to pay the medical bills. It's one of his biggest regrets, is it? Of course, Lisa said. He always felt bad that he couldn't help me more with my homework in high school. Math and science were fine, but when I got into advanced classes, he felt like he was letting me down because he couldn't understand the material. Catherine felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. So he never went back to school? Well, he got his GED a few years ago, Lisa said. He was so proud of that diploma. He framed it and hung it in the living room like it was a college degree. Catherine stood up and walked over to the window. From the 32nd floor, she could see most of the city spread out below them. Somewhere down there, David was probably working his way through another office building, cleaning and organizing and thinking thoughts that would surprise everyone who knew him. Lisa, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Catherine turned back to face her. Have you ever gotten any business advice from your father? Anything about strategy or investments or how companies work? Lisa laughed. From Dad? Miss Sterling, he's a janitor. He's smart about a lot of things, life stuff, how to work hard, how to treat people right. But business? That's not really his area. Never? Not once? Lisa thought about it. Well, there was one time. When I first got the job here, I was nervous about the interview. Dad sat me down and gave me this whole speech about understanding the company's position in the market, knowing our competitors' strengths and weaknesses, thinking about sustainable growth instead of just quarterly profits. It was really good advice, actually. I used a lot of it in my interview. Catherine raised her eyebrows. Where did he say he learned that? He said he picked it up from reading business magazines while waiting in hospital lobbies during Mom's treatments. I figured maybe he absorbed some of it by accident. Catherine nodded slowly, but her mind was racing. Business magazines didn't teach you the kind of sophisticated strategic thinking Lisa was describing. That kind of knowledge came from years of study, from understanding complex economic principles, from actually working in the business world. Has he ever mentioned any specific books or articles that influenced his thinking? Catherine asked. Lisa shrugged. He reads a lot. Always has a book with him when he comes home from work. I never paid much attention to what kind of books, to be honest. I assumed they were novels or maybe history books. Catherine made a mental note to pay more attention to what David was carrying when he came to work. She had a feeling those books weren't novels. Miss Sterling, Lisa said, looking at her curiously, why are you asking all these questions about my dad? Catherine realized she had been grilling Lisa for 20 minutes about her father, and she probably seemed like she had lost her mind. How could she explain that she was beginning to suspect that the quiet janitor who cleaned their building was hiding secrets that could change everything? I'm just trying to understand, Catherine said finally. Your family has been through a lot, and I'm impressed by what you've both accomplished. Lisa smiled. Dad always says that the best education comes from real life, not from books. He says watching people, understanding what motivates them, learning from both success and failure, that's worth more than any degree. Catherine felt goosebumps on her arms. That was exactly the kind of wisdom that had built successful companies. That was the kind of thinking that created great leaders. Lisa, Catherine said, I think your father might be a lot smarter than either of us realized. Lisa laughed. Oh, I've always known he was smart. You don't survive what we survived without being incredibly smart. I just never thought of it as business smart. Catherine looked at her watch. It was almost 10 p.m. and Lisa was still working. Go home, Catherine said. The Henderson projections can wait until morning. Are you sure? I really want to. I'm sure. Go home to your father, and Lisa, next time you talk to him about work, pay attention to his advice. Really pay attention. As Catherine walked back to her own office, she couldn't shake the feeling that David Williams had been hiding in plain sight all along. Tomorrow she was going to find out exactly how much he had been hiding. Catherine barely slept that night. She kept thinking about her conversation with Lisa, about all the small details that didn't quite add up. A janitor who gave sophisticated business advice, a high school dropout who could explain market positioning and sustainable growth strategies, a man who read books during his breaks but somehow always knew exactly the right thing to say about complex business situations. The next morning, Catherine arrived at the office earlier than usual. It was 5:30 a.m. and the building was still quiet except for the security guards and the night cleaning crew finishing their shifts. She told herself she was just coming in early to catch up on work, but deep down she knew the truth. She wanted to see David Williams before he left for the day. She took the elevator down to the lobby and found Pete at his security desk, looking surprised to see her so early 2 days in a row. "Morning, Mrs. Sterling," Pete said. "You're making this a habit?" "Just couldn't sleep," Catherine replied, which wasn't exactly a lie. "Is David still here?" Pete checked his computer screen. "Yeah, he's finishing up on the 15th floor. His shift ends in about 30 minutes. Catherine nodded and walked to the elevator bank. She pressed the button for the 15th floor, her heart beating faster than it should have been. She felt like a detective closing in on a suspect, except she wasn't sure what crime had been committed or even if there was a crime at all. The 15th floor housed the company's research and development department. It was mostly empty at this hour, just rows of cubicles and conference rooms waiting for the workday to begin. Catherine could hear the sound of a vacuum cleaner coming from the far end of the floor. She followed the sound and found David in one of the corner offices, carefully cleaning around a desk covered with financial reports and market analysis documents. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and for just a moment Catherine saw something in his expression that looked almost like he had been expecting her. "Ms. Sterling," David said, turning off the vacuum. "You're here early again." "I wanted to talk to you," Catherine said, stepping into the office. "About yesterday, about Lisa." David leaned against his cleaning cart, giving her his full attention. "What about her?" Catherine took a deep breath. She had practiced this conversation in her head all night, but now that she was here, she didn't know where to start. "Lisa told me some interesting things about the advice you've given her over the years." "Did she?" David's voice was calm, but Catherine caught something in his eyes. A flicker of wariness, maybe, or resignation. "Business advice," Catherine continued. "Sophisticated business advice. The kind of advice that helped her nail her interview for this job." David nodded slowly. "She's a smart girl. She probably would have figured it out on her own." "Maybe," Catherine said, "but that's not the point. The point is that you knew enough to help her in the first place. A man who dropped out of high school and works as a janitor doesn't usually know about market positioning and competitive analysis." David was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting on the handle of his cleaning cart. Catherine could see him thinking, weighing his options, deciding how much to tell her. "What do you want to know?" he asked finally. "I want to know who you really are," Catherine said. "I want to know what you're not telling me." David reached into the pocket of his uniform and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he extracted a folded piece of paper that looked like it had been handled many times. He unfolded it carefully and handed it to Catherine. It was a diploma. Not a GED certificate, but an actual college diploma. Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the University of Chicago. The name on the diploma was David Williams, and the date was from 12 years ago. Catherine stared at the paper in her hands, reading it twice to make sure she wasn't imagining things. "You have a college degree." "Took me 7 years to finish," David said quietly. "Night classes, weekend classes, online courses when they became available. I worked construction during the day and studied whenever I could find the time." Catherine looked up at him. "Why didn't you tell Lisa?" "Because she was already carrying enough weight on her shoulders," David replied. "Her mother was sick, money was tight, and she was trying to keep her grades up so she could get into a good college. The last thing she needed was to worry about whether her old man was neglecting his own education to pay for hers." Catherine handed the diploma back to him, but David shook his head. "Keep looking," he said. Catherine unfolded the paper completely and saw that there was something else attached to it. Another diploma. This one for a Master of Business Administration from Northwestern University. The date was from 4 years ago. "You have an MBA," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Finished it while Lisa was at Harvard," David said. "Seemed fitting that we should both be studying at the same time, even if she didn't know it." Catherine sank into the office chair behind her. "David, why are you working as a janitor? With an MBA from Northwestern, you could be working anywhere. You could be running your own company." David took the diplomas back and folded them carefully before putting them back in his wallet. "You want to know the truth? I applied for business jobs for 2 years after I finished my bachelor's degree. Sent out hundreds of resumes, went on dozens of interviews. You know what I learned?" Catherine shook her head. I learned that nobody wants to hire a 40-year-old construction worker with a business degree, no matter how good his grades were. They look at your work history. They see the gaps where you were taking classes. They see that you don't have any real business experience, and they decide you're not worth the risk. Catherine felt a familiar, uncomfortable twist in her stomach. She thought about her own hiring practices, about the assumptions she made when reviewing resumes. Would she have given David a chance if his application had crossed her desk? But you kept studying, she said. Even after you couldn't find work in business, you went back for your MBA. David smiled, and for the first time since she'd known him, it was a slightly bitter smile. You know what they say about hope. It's a dangerous thing. So you took the janitorial job because I needed to work and it was available, and it paid enough to help Lisa with her expenses, David said. And because honestly I had gotten tired of being rejected. There's only so many times you can have someone look at your resume and tell you that you don't have the right background before you start to believe them. Catherine stood up and walked over to the window. The sun was beginning to rise over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Down below, people were starting their commutes, heading to jobs where they were valued for their education and experience. David, Catherine said without turning around, what would you do if someone offered you a real business job now? Depends on the job, David replied, and depends on whether they were offering it because they thought I could do it or because they felt sorry for me. Catherine turned back to face him. What if I told you I've been looking at some of our expansion plans and we need someone with fresh ideas? Someone who understands both the theoretical side of business and the practical side of what it means to work hard for everything you have. David studied her face carefully. I'd say that sounds like a very specific job description. It is, Catherine said. I've been thinking about creating a new position. Director of Strategic Development. Someone who could look at our business model and find ways to make it more efficient, more sustainable, more connected to the communities we serve. And you think I could do that? Catherine walked closer to him, close enough to see the intelligence in his eyes that she had been blind to for 8 months. David, I think you've been preparing for that job your entire adult life. You've studied business theory. You understand what it means to struggle financially. You know what regular working people need and want. You've raised a daughter who's already making waves in our company. And you've done all of this while working jobs that most people would never appreciate. David was quiet for a long moment. Catherine could see him thinking, weighing the possibilities, trying to decide whether to trust her offer. What about Lisa? He asked finally. How would this affect her position here? It wouldn't, Catherine said firmly. Lisa earned her job on her own merit, and she'll keep it on her own merit. This isn't about her. This is about you and what you can contribute to this company. David leaned back against his cleaning cart, looking suddenly tired. Catherine realized that carrying these secrets for so many years must have been exhausting. There's something else, David said quietly. Something I haven't told you yet. Catherine raised her eyebrows. What? David reached into another pocket and pulled out a folder. It was neat and professional looking, the kind of folder that business presentations come in. He handed it to Catherine. I've been working on this for the past year, he said, in my spare time during my breaks, at home after work. It's a complete business plan for sustainable urban development, low-income housing projects that could be profitable while still providing affordable homes for working families. Catherine opened the folder and found herself looking at the most comprehensive business plan she had seen in years. Financial projections, market analysis, environmental impact studies, community integration strategies. It was brilliant. David, Catherine said, flipping through page after page of detailed research and innovative ideas. This is incredible. This could revolutionize how we think about urban development. It's just an idea, David said modestly. Something I've been playing around with. Catherine closed the folder and looked at him with new respect. This isn't just an idea. This is a multi-million-dollar opportunity. This is exactly the kind of forward-thinking strategy that could set us apart from every other development company in the country. She paused, thinking about everything that had happened over the past few days. The assumptions she had made, the talent she had overlooked, the opportunities she had missed because she was too blind to see past a uniform and a mop bucket. David, Catherine said, I owe you an apology. Not just for the other morning in the lobby, but for 8 months of not seeing who you really are. David shook his head. You don't owe me anything. You didn't know, But I should have, Catherine replied. A good leader pays attention to the people around her. A good leader recognizes talent wherever it comes from. I failed at both of those things. She held up the folder. But I'd like a chance to make it right. Will you consider my offer? Will you let me give you the opportunity you should have had years ago? David looked at her for a long moment, then glanced at his cleaning cart, then back at her. Catherine could see the exact moment when he made his decision. I'll consider it, he said quietly. But I have one condition. What's that? I want to tell Lisa myself. About the degrees, about the business plan, about everything. She deserves to hear it from me, not find out through company gossip. Catherine nodded. Of course. When will you tell her? David checked his watch. She'll be here in about an hour. I think it's time she learned the truth about what her father has been doing during all those quiet night shifts. An hour later, Catherine found herself sitting in the company's main conference room, feeling more nervous than she had in years. She had called an emergency meeting with her senior staff, but the real purpose was something none of them would expect. Through the glass walls of the conference room, she could see employees starting to arrive for the workday, including Lisa, who walked past carrying her usual coffee and briefcase. David had gone home to shower and change clothes. He would be back in an hour, dressed not as a janitor but as the businessman he had always been underneath. Catherine had spent the time reviewing his urban development proposal again, and each time she read it, she was more impressed. This wasn't just good work. This was the kind of innovative thinking that could transform their entire company. Her assistant knocked on the conference room door. Mrs. Sterling? Everyone's here for the meeting. Catherine nodded, taking a deep breath. Send them in. And please ask Lisa Williams to join us as well. The senior staff filed in. Her vice president of operations, the head of finance, the director of human resources, and several other department heads. They looked curious but not particularly concerned. Emergency meetings weren't unusual in their business. Lisa came in last, looking slightly confused about why she had been invited to a senior staff meeting. Please, everyone sit down, Catherine said, standing at the head of the long conference table. I know this meeting is unusual, but I have something important to share with you. Something that's going to change how we think about this company and the people who work here. The room was quiet, everyone giving her their full attention. Lisa sat at the far end of the table, still looking puzzled but trying to appear confident. 3 days ago, Catherine began, I made a mistake. A big mistake. I made assumptions about someone based on their job title and their appearance, and those assumptions were completely wrong. More than wrong. They were unfair and, frankly, embarrassing. She could see people exchanging glances around the table. Catherine Sterling admitting to a mistake was not something any of them heard very often. I'm telling you this because we're about to meet someone who's going to join our leadership team, someone whose background might surprise you, but whose qualifications and vision are exactly what this company needs to move forward. The conference room door opened, and David walked in. But this wasn't the David that everyone in the building was used to seeing. Instead of his janitor's uniform, he wore a navy blue suit that fit him perfectly. His shoulders were straight, his expression confident, and he carried himself like someone who belonged in a boardroom. The transformation was so complete that several people didn't immediately recognize him. Lisa's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Her eyes widened as she stared at her father, trying to process what she was seeing. Ladies and gentlemen, Catherine said, I'd like you to meet David Williams, our new Director of Strategic Development. The silence in the room was so complete that Catherine could hear the building's air conditioning system. Everyone was staring at David, but their expressions ranged from confusion to shock to something that looked like recognition dawning slowly. Lisa set her coffee cup down with shaking hands. Dad? Her voice was barely a whisper. David looked directly at his daughter, his expression gentle but serious. Hello, sweetheart. I don't understand, Lisa said, looking back and forth between David and Catherine. What's going on? Why are you dressed like that? What's this about a director position? Catherine gestured for David to sit down, which he did with the same quiet dignity he had always shown. David, would you like to explain? David folded his hands on the conference table and looked at his daughter with an expression full of love and something that might have been nervousness. Lisa, there are some things about me that you don't know. Things I should have told you a long time ago, but I was trying to protect you. Protect me from what? Lisa asked, her voice getting stronger but also more confused. David reached into his jacket and pulled out the same worn wallet he had shown Catherine earlier. He extracted the folded diplomas and laid them on the table in front of him, smoothing them out carefully. "I went back to school while you were in high school and college," he said quietly. "I got my bachelor's degree in business administration, and then my MBA. I've been studying business and economics for the past 12 years. Lisa stared at the diplomas like they were written in a foreign language. You have an MBA? From Northwestern?" "I studied at night and on weekends," David continued. "During all those years when you thought I was just working cleaning jobs to pay the bills?" "I was working those jobs, but I was also taking classes, writing papers, learning everything I could about business and finance and strategic planning." Lisa's face went through several different expressions: shock, confusion, and then something that looked almost like hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were already under so much pressure," David said, his voice gentle. "You were trying to get perfect grades, dealing with your mother's illness, worrying about college applications and scholarship requirements. I didn't want you to feel like you had to worry about my education too. But Dad, I could have helped you study. We could have done homework together." David smiled, and Catherine could see tears in his eyes. "Sweetheart, you were already helping me more than you knew. Every time I watched you work so hard on your own studies, every time I saw how determined you were to succeed, it motivated me to keep pushing forward with my own education." Lisa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Catherine noticed that everyone else in the room was sitting very still, like they were afraid to interrupt this private family moment that was happening in front of them. "There's more," David said, pulling out the folder containing his business plan. "I've been working on this for over a year. It's a complete strategy for sustainable urban development, housing, projects that would be profitable, while also providing affordable homes for working families." He slid the folder across the table to Lisa. She opened it with trembling fingers and began reading the first page. Catherine watched as Lisa's expression changed from confusion to amazement to something that looked like pride. "Dad, this is incredible," Lisa said, flipping through more pages. "These financial projections, the environmental impact studies, the community integration plans. This is graduate-level work. This is better than graduate-level work." "It's what I've been thinking about during all those quiet night shifts," David said. "All those hours when the building was empty and I had time to really consider how business could be used to help people, instead of just making money." Lisa looked up from the folder, her eyes bright with tears but also with something else: respect, admiration, and a kind of wonder. "You've been carrying all of this by yourself for years?" David nodded. "I wanted to wait until you were established in your own career before I tried to use my education professionally. I didn't want anyone to think you got your job because of connections or that my success or failure would reflect on you. But you were working as a janitor," Lisa said, still trying to process everything. "With an MBA, you could have been working anywhere." David's expression grew more serious. "I tried, sweetheart. For 2 years after I got my bachelor's degree, I applied for business positions everywhere. But when employers saw my work history, saw that I was a construction worker who went back to school, they decided I wasn't worth the risk. So I took the night cleaning job because it paid well enough to help with your expenses and because it gave me time to keep studying." Catherine cleared her throat gently. "Lisa, your father has been working in this building for 8 months. During that time, he's been watching over you, making sure you were safe during those long nights when you worked late. And during his breaks, he's been developing one of the most innovative business strategies I've ever seen." Lisa looked around the conference room at all the senior staff members who were watching this family reunion with expressions of amazement and respect. "So this is real? You're really offering Dad a director position?" "More than that," Catherine said. "I'm asking him to lead our expansion into sustainable development. His business plan could revolutionize how we approach urban housing, and I think it could make us the most innovative development company in the country." Lisa stood up from her chair and walked around the table to where David was sitting. Without saying a word, she wrapped her arms around him in a hug that was so full of love and pride that it made Catherine's chest tight with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, Dad," Lisa whispered. "I've always been proud of you, but now I understand why you always seem to know exactly the right thing to say about business. Now I understand why your advice was always so good." David hugged his daughter back, and Catherine could see his shoulders shaking slightly. I'm proud of you too, sweetheart. Everything I did, every class I took, every late night I spent studying, it was all inspired by watching you work so hard for your dreams. When they finally separated, Lisa wiped her eyes and looked around the room with a bright smile. I'm sorry, everyone. I know this is a business meeting and we're probably being very unprofessional. The head of finance, a stern woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, spoke up for the first time. Lisa, I think what we just witnessed was the most inspiring thing I've seen in 20 years of business. Your father's dedication to education, his innovative thinking, and the way he supported your career while building his own. That's not unprofessional. That's exactly the kind of leadership this company needs. Everyone around the table nodded in agreement. Catherine felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with business success and everything to do with witnessing something beautiful and real. So, Catherine said, looking at David, do you accept the position? David looked at Lisa, who nodded encouragingly, then back at Catherine. I accept, but I have one request. What's that? I'd like Lisa to be part of the implementation team for the urban development project. Not because she's my daughter, but because she's one of the smartest analysts in this company, and I think her perspective would be valuable. Lisa's face lit up. Really? You want to work together? If you're interested, David said. I think we make a pretty good team. Catherine smiled, feeling like she was watching the beginning of something wonderful. I think that can be arranged. As the meeting wrapped up and people began to file out of the conference room, Catherine lingered behind with David and Lisa. The morning sun was streaming through the windows, casting everything in a golden light that made the whole scene feel almost magical. David, Catherine said, I want you to know that I've learned more about leadership and recognizing talent in the past 3 days than I did in the previous 10 years. Thank you for that lesson. David shook his head. Thank you for giving me a chance, and for seeing past the uniform to the person underneath. Lisa looked at both of them with an expression of pure happiness. You know what the best part of this is? What? Catherine asked. Now when Dad gives me business advice, I don't have to wonder where he learned it all. They all laughed, and Catherine realized that this was what success really looked like. Not just profit margins and quarterly reports, but people being seen for who they really are, families supporting each other's dreams, and second chances that change everything. 6 months later, David's urban development project had become the company's most successful new venture. Lisa had been promoted to senior strategic analyst, and Catherine had implemented a company-wide program to provide educational support for all employees and their families. The quiet janitor who didn't belong in the executive lobby had taught them all that belonging isn't about where you start. It's about the courage to keep growing, the wisdom to support others, and the faith to believe that your true worth will eventually be recognized.